It's not very often that one gets to put the words visionary and librarian together in the same sentence, much less have two librarians and visionaries together in the same room for a conversation, but that's exactly what we are fortunate to have this afternoon with Brewster Kahle and Jeff MacKie-Mason. Brewster Kahle is, as I mentioned, the founder of the Internet Archive, which is one of the largest libraries in the world, preserving some 25 petabytes of data and web pages, books, music, television, software, and more. Last night, if you were there, you got to see how many zeros a petabyte, 25 petabytes involved. It's a lot of zeros. He has pioneered the development of free and accessible repositories of information, working with some 400 libraries and university partners. After he graduated from MIT, where he studied artificial intelligence, Brewster Kahle helped found the company Thinking Machines, which specialized in the development of parallel supercomputers. In 1989, he created the Internet's first publishing system called Wide Area Information Server, or WAIS, W-A-I-S. Then, in 1996, he co-founded Alexa Internet, which helped catalog the web. Brewster Kahle is, at the same time, a passionate advocate for public internet access and has spent his career finding the best possible ways to provide people with universal access to knowledge. It's not least for this reason that it is a very special privilege to welcome him to this great public research university. Moreover, as a visionary and entrepreneur, he is, at least in my eyes, also a humanist, one of whose great causes has been the preservation of the record of the human past. A truly daunting but ever so central a project, especially for an age that tends to forget just how much the future is dependent upon the past. His interlocutor this afternoon is Jeff MacKie-Mason, our university librarian and chief digital scholarship officer. Before coming to Berkeley, Jeff was dean of the School of Information at the University of Michigan, where he concentrated on questions concerning digital libraries and electronic access to materials and journals. These are without any doubt among the critical issues facing any university library today. Jeff is also an MIT grad, having earned his PhD there, as well as a master's in public policy from the University of Michigan. He's a valued scholar and colleague with expertise in human interaction with online information, economics, and public policy. Today, he oversees Berkeley's library system, which houses more than 11 million volumes in several dozen facilities across campus. Jeff and Brewster Kahle will be in conversation for about 40 minutes, and then we'll leave approximately 20 minutes at the end of their conversation for your questions and comments and public engagements. I want to say a special thank you to my partners and colleagues at the Berkeley Center for New Media, especially Greg Niemeyer, Yelda Kosnick, Ken Goldberg, and Laura Wolf, who have co-sponsored Brewster Kahle's Regents Lecture and his residency at Berkeley. Please join me now in welcoming Brewster Kahle and Jeff MacKie-Mason.
All right, thanks, Tony, very much. Welcome, Brewster.
Thank you, Jeff.
We learned today that we grew up just 30 miles apart from each other and then went to the same institution. I came the year you graduated. I came to start my PhD in '82 when you graduated from MIT. So we keep crossing, but I first became aware of you in the late '80s when I was sitting in my office in Michigan as a faculty member with black Steve Jobs next cube on my desk. And my co-author and colleague, Hal Berry, called me into his office one day and said, "Look at this thing. It's called Waves." And Hal and I were internet geeks and still are, and started playing with that and loved it. So I got to know you as the geek who invented Waves. And you're well known to this audience, and you're known for other things you did. But those are the facts. I'm curious, despite being a technologist and a geek and an entrepreneur, you've been dedicated throughout your career to public access, as Tony said, and to making the internet available to everybody. Why? Where did that come from?
I'm the sort of trail edge of the hippies, and so an idealist, utopianist, and a geek. and a friend posed a question, which was, okay, you're optimist and utopianist and a technologist, paint a portrait that's positive with your technology. And this was back in 1980, and there are a couple of ideas floating around, and it actually was a harder question than I thought it would be, because it was really easy to complain about things, but it was harder to come up with a positive vision. So I thought, okay, well, I only could come up with two ideas. One was to try to protect people's privacy when they would want to throw it away, and the other was build a library of everything. I thought the library of everything would be, obvious, so that everybody else would do it. So I tried to work on the privacy aspect, which would turn out to be too hard at that time. So I fell back to Plan B, and so it was more of an analogy that if you have this technology, and we knew Moore's law was coming, was on its way, so we knew when we'd be able to store all of the text in the Library of Congress. We knew when we'd be able to do all these things. Could we make that in such a way that it would be an interesting and fun environment? It was also the heady days of AI, when the thought was we could build a machine that could think, and we were wanting to build a global brain. So if we're going to go and build our new overlords, let's at least have it read good books. Right, so the idea of going and make it so that we weren't data starved in this new computational world that we were coming into. We wanted it to be able to have interesting things, so that we build machines that would be interesting to interact with. And I've never had a new idea since. So that was 1980, and so it's just been sort of, okay, well, how hard could it be? And we needed computers, and then we needed a publishing system. And that was Waze, and so that kind of worked, and it was overtaken by the World Wide Web, but that was still open, so score, we win. Then once publishing was going online, to build the library. So for me, it's just been one idea just for 35 years. I wish I were more clever.
Yeah. So you wanted to build the library of everything for everyone.
Yes.
That's so 1980.
Yeah.
So I want to start with something that really is basically just a cheat on my part, because the question I get asked most often these days is, why do we need libraries? Isn't everything free and available on the internet? And I know what my answer to that is, but I'd love to have you tell everybody what your answer to that is. Why do we need libraries?
Oh, libraries, or let's take it out on another notch, which is sort of the creative works of humankind, sort of the storehouse of what it is people have made. In many ways, it is us. The library is just is where we live when we're dead. So it's how do we go and pass on and learn from the collective works. If we really end up having to ask that question a lot, it means that we librarians are not doing our job, that we're not springing into the new opportunities that the networks, the computers that have afforded us. If libraries become book museums, we don't need libraries anymore. But if libraries become the go-to place, that if you are looking for information resources that are bigger than you can go and pick and paw yourself as a researcher or as an individual, the wonder of a library, walking into a library, the thing you're supposed to, the offer was, you walk into a library and you can get access to everything. That was the conceit. And of course it wasn't all there, but the librarians would say, if it's not here, we'll get it for you. What a great thing. Well, let's make that happen now. I think we're in this sort of stumbling around in this digital era where we seem to be running into absolute freedom and everything's available on YouTube, yet nothing's quite available. It's massively constricted and licensed and owned and by somebody else. We're living this transitionary period, which is difficult. And I just hope that the libraries, which are well funded, there's a very service-oriented community that works in libraries, that we see that institution move forward. That's why my title is Digital Librarian, that I work at an archive, is to be able to see that idea move forward. We've got special legal dispensation to be able to do our work. Let's not lose libraries on our shift.
All right, so if we are moving into an age where most of the information ever is stored digitally, and we're concerned about preserving it, as you said, because it's where we go when we die, and we need that for future generations. How confident are you in this ability to preserve digital information? This is another challenge we face. Digital information has really only been around about 30 years. It's in its infancy to a large extent. How confident are you that we can rely on our digital stores to provide the future with the knowledge of what happened today?
Actually, a lot of it's a lot easier. So I just visited the NRLF, the Northern Regional Library Facility, which is this awesome temple of books that's in Richmond, California. It's 7 to 8 million volumes there, and they get about 125,000 new books coming in every year. They serve about 70,000 books to people all through the UCs to be able to make this available. It's fantastic, it's huge, it's heavy, and it's so much easier to do that digitally. So we have about 8 million books on the Internet Archive. We serve not 70,000 a year, we serve about 25 million books a month to people. That the opportunity to make these things available is so much easier given we've got computer networks to be able to. Our job in many ways is so much easier. It's the librarian's day. That we have this technology to make not only it available locally, but globally. But will we live up to that? All of our funding structures, you're a university librarian, you've got a budget that's being fought over, and the question, are you going to just make services available to the people on the Berkeley campus or globally? And of course, the business offers from journal publishers often say, no, it's just going to be the Berkeley campus, and it's going to be locked up in these sort of weird ways. And so, in some sense, it's the librarian's day, but we're seeing also constrictions that are going to make our lives very hard. If we lose openness as a really core principle, we're going to lose it. And you say, oh, how could we lose that? Well, I don't know. I'm carrying an iPhone with me, and that is one of the most locked down pieces of technology I've ever seen. You have to get permission from Apple to have an app on the iPhone. Permission. If you're going to change the operating system and add some new free feature to it from free software, that's called jailbreaking. Oops. The network is locked down and spies on you all the time. There's this sort of, we're seeing sort of best of times, worst of times. We're seeing, and it's not there's good guys and bad guys. It's sort of co-evolving in sort of ultimate lockdown, surveillance state, at the same time as openness, free, and private. And I know which side I'm throwing myself on, but we really need more people to do so. And Berkeley is a state institution. You may not get state funding anymore, but it's a state institution and has a role towards forming the world that we want to be living in. So I think there's sort of a natural alliance with the free and open world and organizations and institutions like Berkeley.
Let me press you a little bit more on preservation, though, for the long term, because we're a university library. We like to think about saving things for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yeah.
First, you've got a pretty big server farm with quite a few petabytes of data on it.
Yeah.
How do you make sure those bits don't rot?
Well, yes, Michael Lesk said there's a couple of problems to sort of data preservation. There's bit rot. Like, do you actually just have the same bits over time? And then there's, can you play it over time?
Right.
And so the bit rot is you just have to be attentive. If you ever sleep for 10 years, you're dead. And because you can't read the stuff anymore or not efficiently. So that's one characteristic in terms of bit rot, is you just have to keep it going. So you have to keep copying forward. And you need to be able to avoid things like institutional failure or regime change. Because what happens to libraries is they're burned. That's just historically true, and they're generally burned by governments. They just don't want the old stuff around. So that'll probably happen to us. I don't know when. So let's design for it. All right? If we want to be the Library of Alexandria version 2, let's learn from the Library of Alexandria version 1, which is best known for burning. So why don't we go and make multiple copies in other places? So I'd love to see an international library system. National libraries are designed to keep their own national collections. But how about, say, 5 or 10 international libraries that have large-scale swap agreements, where they basically have copies of all the others. So if there's walls that come up and down every time, or there's a problem where one gets snooped, maybe literally, that after things kind of calm down, they can reconstruct what was there. And so we've tried this with by putting a partial copy in Alexandria, Egypt. Really? It's actually completely cool. And also in Amsterdam. So we've got a copy in San Francisco, which is an earthquake zone, the Middle East, and a flood zone, which is the Netherlands. What could go wrong? So I think we need a few more copies for the BitRot. Going and moving things forward and making things in different formats actually is just also diligence. Also a way of, we can't deal with digital rights management. Encryption is the enemy of moving things forward. Also license agreements. So the license agreements where you're not allowed to actually hold on to the materials. So that a lot of the UC's agreements are licenses where you don't have perpetual access to be able to move it forward. So there's legal impediments towards doing this. And the thing that I think Mike left out is really the institutional responsibilities. That if we really knew what our responsibilities were, like as universities, national libraries, public libraries, independent libraries like ours, in this new world, it would be a lot easier to move forward. But I think we're still struggling even with that. So people, we've got the great opportunity, but what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to divvy up the work is probably the thing that worries me the most. And that the Internet Archive is in many ways still unique. And that's dumb out there. We're just not, we shouldn't be unique. There should be more of the Internet Archive-like things. There should be more of these things within our existing national infrastructure.
So you mentioned that governments like to burn libraries, and they certainly have through history. And as I understand it, the Internet Archive respects robots.txt. And if somebody says they don't want their web pages archived, you don't archive them. My understanding also is that if a website changes its policy and adds a robots.txt, you actually go back and erase all the things you had archived from that website to not store them because they said they don't want their things stored. How do you justify scrubbing history?
A lot of the web, particularly in the web collection, there's this question of sort of how do we deal with a web that some of it wasn't meant to be kept in perpetuity. So we archive materials, but then we take things out of the Wayback Machine. We do what we can to not actually remove them from the hard disks. But we make things unavailable on request. So it's an opting out. And fortunately, it's not been widespreadly used. And other libraries and archives will have different policies that are used in different ways. So the robots exclusions by national libraries that contract with us to do things, they say they've got the rights to go walk through those robot exclusions. And so we do these sorts of things as time goes on. It's an evolving process. When we first started the web archiving, our lawyer friend said that bad things were going to happen to us. Lawyers were going to rain on us like frogs. Was sort of this is like, if you start massively copying everybody else's stuff, people are going to get mad at you. And it didn't happen. It was just awesome. And then we wanted to go and make it available again as the Wayback Machine. So you could type in a URL and see past versions, verbatim copies of what was on the web at other times. And we were quite nervous about this based on advice. But there was a group of organizations that sort of pulled together to try to sort of play together. Actually, we launched the Wayback Machine here in this room 15 years ago, in 2001. And it was with Larry Lessig, the head of the J School. Peter, I believe, was here at Bancroft, spoke on behalf of saving our born digital materials, things that were living and breathing only in digital form. And Born Digital was actually, I think, coined by Peter Lyman, who was the university librarian at the time. So Berkeley's always played a role in preserving and harboring new ideas towards making this whole thing happen.
I'm proud of it. You mentioned a couple of times already some of the problems that are posed by license restrictions and copyright to different legal institutions. Your organization has largely avoided copyright challenges and lawsuits, as you said. But it does limit what you do. We talked at lunch some about some of these limits, and you gave me, as an example, you archive TV news programs, but you only make freely available on the web streaming of 1-minute snippets of it, or segments of that, in part because of concern about intellectual property rights, I assume.
Yes.
And others, of course, like the Hadi Trust, have not been able to avoid lawyers and have been caught up in very expensive lawsuits.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts, or do you have any positions on what changes we should be seeking in copyright law, recognizing the copyright law is in the Constitution and there are benefits from it as well as costs? Do you have any views about where we should go with copyright?
Oh, there are lots of ideas of where we can go with copyright law. But there's a real question, though, if we open it up, are we going to win or lose on net? So if there's, since 1976 Copyright Act, which flipped such that it made it so that, it used to be when I was growing up, you had to put a little C on things and send a copy into the Library of Congress, otherwise you didn't get protection. It wasn't copyrighted. And then in 76, everything became copyrighted. Like completely weird. I mean, it was this flip of opt-in to opt-out of copyright. And ever since, we've seen just the public erosion of the public interest. I think because we just don't have a major lobbying group, like voters, that are having a very big impact on how some of these things are coming down. I would say we have all the laws we need to move forward far and fast right now. We just don't realize it. And so the idea of digitizing everything, we haven't had anybody have a gripe with that. It's usually in the access, and how much access. And what I found out of building the Internet Archive over these almost now 20 years is that what people get mad at is when they feel like they're being taken advantage of. If they think that somebody else is getting away with something that, at their expense. If you step back from that and understand that dynamic, there's all sorts of ways that we can operate. Libraries mostly are there to give untraditional access to materials. Think of newspapers, right? The old saw of an old newspaper is like fish wrap. It's not useful, but it is useful, but in a very different way. So if we stay out of the way of somebody trying to sell today's newspaper over and over again, there's much more latitude. So we've been archiving television, Russian, Chinese, Japanese, Iraqi, Al Jazeera, BBC, CNN, 24 hours a day, DVD quality, since the year 2000. And then we made US television news available streaming with 1 minute. But if you want the whole thing, we print it onto a DVD and send it to you. And you have to send it back. Why? To be a little clunky, right? To sort of simulate that old sort of clunkiness of dealing with the library. And we only, when we make it available searchably on the net, which I highly recommend you do, we want everyone to be a Jon Stewart research department. We want everyone to think critically about what's on television. Quote, compare, and contrast. So you have to quote, you basically can find people's quotes based on what they said. And you get these 1 minute snippets that you can use. But we only put it into the search engine after 1 day. Again, to just sort of take it out of the news cycle. We don't want to have somebody that's running CNN.com go to his boss and say, I can't make any money because of those guys. We want to make it so that people have research use of these materials after it's sort of out of their little cycle. But that cycle might be a day, not life plus 70. And the same thing goes with web pages. They're sort of, stay out of the way of commerce, and we're free to fly. Be respectful. Don't make money off of people. Do a good job. Appreciate what they're doing. And I think we are not only allowed, it's our jobs to go and build a library of everything. We've promised people that they could turn their screens and answer questions. What we've fallen completely short. We are failing at this. You can ask anything that is answered by Wikipedia. Cool. But you want the depth, you want the debate, you want some of the publications from the 20th century, almost all that is not available to the end users. We've trained people now on asking questions using Google all the time. They're doing it all the time. They're thirsty for it. They're interested in all sorts of things. Yet it's locked up in organizations like the University of California, and it's not been made massively available. it could be made much more available than it is, and I don't think we've seen the end of it. There's plenty of money. It's not like we should strip all the money out of publishing. We want people to be up and running. The United States spends $12 billion a year on its library system. $3 or $4 billion goes to publishers' products. I don't suggest we spend any less. I just suggest we spend it better. I think over lunch you said that of your acquisitions budget, about 60% goes to journal licensing. Well, good. That's important, but are we doing the right licenses? Are we doing it in such a way that it's the right way to spend this money? A lot of that was public monies to be done. Let's go and have the base materials available to all. I think even you wanted to do this and try to go towards this. So, but let's compete on services on top of it, not access to the base materials. I think we've got the roles and the responsibilities to do this. And another year that goes by means another year that somebody graduates without access to the best that we have to offer. And if it's not online, it's as if it doesn't exist. And if we're raising our children and ourselves based on not the best we have ever written, then we're going to get the generation that we deserve.
One of the things that the University of California has done and is quite proud of in moving in this direction is a now system-wide policy that all of the published research-related output by faculty, graduate students, researchers, and so forth has to be deposited into the university's open access archive with granting the university a non-exclusive right to it. So even if you have a publisher publish it, which of course most of the research is ultimately, and you grant them copyright, that copyright is preceded by this non-exclusive right. So the big challenge for us now is actually convincing the faculty and graduate students and postdocs and so forth to actually do that, because it's a mandatory policy with no teeth behind it, and it's a big change in culture to get everybody to go to the trouble of depositing. But we're creating an archive, and it's at base access. So it means it's not easy to use, it's not easy to find, it's not very well organized, but it's there, and we're preserving it, and it's openly available.
Well, I hope the professors, the faculty, the students here at Berkeley, to your new university librarian, give them some slack to help push on these sorts of initiatives, to go and stand up to some of these onerous licensing processes, to go and bias toward your tenure process, towards people that are publishing in the open access journals, maybe using some of your funds to go and help people go and put them into these pay to go and write, but then they're open access afterwards. We do have to shift things, and it's hard to shift these things, but it's great to see a university librarian go and say, this is where we have to go. I think we should have done it years ago, but let's at least start now and get at least the scholarly materials openly accessible. A lot of the interesting work that's coming on is people going and doing data mining on top of these. So it's not just peeking and poking and looking at an individual document. It's looking across all of it. My friend Jesse Ossabel calls it a macroscope. We got so far with a microscope, right? Microscopes, we got all sorts of things done. But with a macroscope, you can take the big picture. I mean, just across the hall is the Data Sciences Institute inside your library itself. And these are people that are trained to go and work with academics, to go and use these data sciences, statistical tools, data mining tools to get your work done. They're the middleware layer, but how do we go and make it so that they're turning to library collections to be able to have access to it? Right now they're getting bits and pieces out of the Googles and Yahoos that they deign to go and give out for free. This isn't good enough. We need access to the books, music, video, all the comprehensive collections of human knowledge in such a way that they can be data mined without actually having to ask permission of some corporation. That's the only way that we're going to be making steps forward, and it's cool. There's interest in doing it. So if we can go and bring our collections into these environments, and I'd say we have all the legal room to be able to move forward in these areas. Yes, there's been lawsuits, but there are a lot of them going our way. Then let's go and build that library of the dreams. It's 2016, isn't it time?
So you and I can't agree more on wanting access to everything, and that's why we're librarians and why we're here. But let me dig down a little bit now in your experience with the Internet Archive and the experience that we're having. We're building these digital collections. They're big, billions of files, petabytes of data. Of course, access doesn't just mean having it and having it be open. It means being able to find the information you want and need and being able to process it. When you throw everything into the drawer, you may be able to save it and preserve it, but how do people find it and use it? What are you thinking about the future of that?
Oh, the finding has gotten actually much easier again. I mean, Google is just, it's a miracle, right? You go and search with there's just a few words and they pull out 1 billion possible documents. They pull out things that actually are relevant. It's amazing. The only way that they've been able to do that is have lots and lots of use. And I think what we've ended up with, and especially in the academic data sets, is we've ended up with only one place having access to things, whether it's JSTOR or HathiTrust or the Internet Archive for that matter. And going in one place, you're limited by their rules and how good they are. Let's let some competition happen across this. Let's take the legal documents and not just have Westlaw and LexisNexis. Let's have new startups go and have access to the bulk collections. So if we can go and make these bulk collections available so that new finding aids can compete against each other to go and find interesting new ways to move through it. And maybe it'll be in completely different ways than we're imagined in sort of the keywords and you get this. Maybe we're going to start using these screens that are kind of interesting, that are coming out, that are very large, very high res, beautiful screens in new and interesting ways. You know, the Oculus Rift, who knows? What are the ways that we're going to move through it? The only way we're going to find new ways is opening it up and making it bulk accessible to people that can then use things in new ways. We're getting services, they say they're open, but they're not really open. They only allow you one at a time, you know, use their interface. We need bulk access to go and build these new and fun tools. The tools are able to be built. We've seen Google do great things, but it's often not built on all of the different things that we've got.
So let's take the Internet Archive for a second. Let me focus on the Wayback Machine. Right now, if I want to find a URL on a given date, if you have it, that's how I find it. I search on the URL, I select the date. But that's it.
Yeah.
Do you all have any plans, do you have any projects, or are other people working with your open access archive, developing tools to help us find what's in there better than that?
Yes, actually, based on this wonderful article by Jill Lepore about the Wayback Machine, the Arnold Foundation said, we should fix some of this and make it more searchable. So they actually funded to make it more searchable, also to make it so that the collections are better, and that there's APIs for going and hoovering things out. And people are now already hoovering things out and building new interfaces. We used to just have a bot that kind of ran around and tried to collect all the web pages it could, but now there are 1,000 librarians that build subject-based collections that are housed at the Internet Archive. A bunch of the librarians at UC Berkeley are building these subject-oriented collections, things like Afghan War. There's different collections that are coming about, and they can go pull these out and make them data sets for other people to use, so that it's less there's the web, and it's more there's all knowledge that happens to be available on the internet. Here are different slices of it, and we're getting better at these tools, both for end user access, which is the Internet Archive, but also wholesale access so that other people can build on it. So this is happening up a storm. The Wayback Machine gets about 2,000 to 3,000 queries per second. Just a lot of use to be able to go and pull a lot of these materials out of it. And some of those are bots that are doing it, not just humans.
So you landed on two different things that I wanted. My next question. First is I wanted to actually refer to Jill Lepore's article, fabulous article in the New Yorker last year. She said, one of the things she wrote that I just thought was beautifully stated was that a footnote used to say, here is how I know this and where I found it. But a footnote that's a link, which is more and more common today, a footnote that's a URL says, here's what I used to know and where I once found it, but chances are it's not there anymore because the URL's rot. And there's a well-known recent study from Harvard Law School, as you know, that studied the links cited in law review articles and Supreme Court decisions over the previous 6 years, and found that after 6 years, 70% of the links in law reviews and 50% of the links in Supreme Court decisions were dead. People couldn't find it. Now, one answer to that is the Wayback Machine, because of course if the link is there and the data is there, you can go, but you don't have everything. You don't have the comprehensive archive of everything. What is the future of preserving are links to knowledge and the use of public archiving to make it possible to know where things came from, not just where they used to be.
So we've done a few steps towards this. It's so what we really like is that if you're in your web browser and you're surfing around and you hit a 404 document not found, that it basically goes and says, and there happens to be one in the Wayback Machine. You want it? Click go. And we actually have a plugin for that we're using internally, and we're talking with some of the browser makers to go and make it so just the web becomes more reliable in and of itself. That would be great, and we're now prepared for that, and we're building towards that. We've also, every time a Wikipedia article is published, we look over it to find any links that are new on that page, and then we crawl it right then of what was the author's intent of that link. So we make sure that there's a copy of that. Also, if you host on WordPress.com, then all of those outbound links, we just make them come back and be true. And now there was a volunteer that was working with the Wikipedia. Then he's in, I think, Penn State, and he just wrote a bot to go around every Wikipedia article and find which ones were dead. And there are millions. And he basically found which ones were dead, looked into the Wayback Machine, found if it was still alive, and basically linked and changed the article to point now to the Wayback Machine. So I think it's a step to basically going and fixing the web. The web, I mean, Tim Berners-Lee did an amazing thing by making it so simple that it spread like wildfire, but it didn't have archiving built into it, unlike a previous system, which was much more complicated and it didn't work as well as the World Wide Web. Anyway, so we've basically been trying to put archiving back on top as a kludge into the World Wide Web. What I think we really should do is now look at ourselves, say the web is now 20 years old, 25 years old. What can we do to redesign the web to work better? And actually, I gave a talk a couple days ago at the iSchool here on locking the web open. And we fixed the World Wide Web infrastructure itself such that you basically built archiving into it, as well as reader privacy, which would be awesome to have, unlike what Snowden has shown. We built one of the largest surveillance networks ever, actually probably the biggest surveillance network ever built by humans, which is called the World Wide Web. And is there some way we can do and fix that by building the World Wide Web on top of the World Wide Web to make it a more reliable infrastructure? I think we shouldn't think of this as cast in stone. I think it's a work in progress. And let's go and use public institutions and those that are interested in the public good to help push forward the infrastructure of the net. So bring the analog materials online. Yes, right now, let's do it. And make it publicly available, not just to those that are inside universities. Let's go and keep the born digital materials perpetually and make it so that there's more services in the public sphere towards making it so that footnotes stay alive. And then let's build towards a more robust infrastructure for the web and the open world itself, such that we have something that isn't a kludge, like the Wayback Machine, put on top of the World Wide Web, but it's actually built with the idea that this is our cultural history that's being pursued here. How do we go and make it so it's easy to be a librarian, not hard?
So I'm going to change directions a little bit to touch on another topic that you've written about. We in research libraries have been, this isn't true universally, but it's pretty widely true, been addressing issues of scale, and scale is everything in information these days because of the explosion of the production of information in a digital world and the desire to access it. We've been dealing with scale and our shrinking budgets, in part by doing more sharing and more collaboration. You mentioned our NRLF facility. When I say our, that's actually a UC facility. It's a University of California facility. Berkeley manages it, but we also have, the UC has one Southern California, the Southern RLF. And in part, that's there so that we can share our physical collections and reduce the number of copies we have to have. We haven't made much progress on that yet, but that's part of the goal, to have more collaboration. We're members of Hadi Trust, which has ownership of the digital copies of about 14 million books that Google scanned out of our libraries. which is a shared, basically about 75 universities now I think belong to it, and it's a shared collection. But you've been advocating that a more distributed approach to digital libraries and what you call building libraries together. And I'd be interested to hear you describe that and discuss that against the need to, or what we have perceived as the need to solve the scale problem by actually aggregating more.
Right. So, yeah, there's again, these sort of counter trends. You have these advantages of cloud-based services where, I'm not sure quite where the cloud is, but it's awesome. And so that if we have our services in the cloud, we can all share it and reinforce and just build one, and it would be terrific. Well, one is almost always the wrong answer. So how do we go and not just end up with monopolies in particular areas, but we have diversity, yet we still have efficiency. And it's tough. So there's this whole movement towards centralization because of the difficulties in raising unnecessary funds. Why don't we just work together? But we don't want just one. So how do we do this? Fortunately, some of the technologies are going our way. So the Library of Congress, 28 million books, largest library by far. If you take all the words in a book, it's about a megabyte. About a megabyte a book. 28 million megabytes, because mega, giga, tera. 28 terabytes. So all of the words in the Library of Congress is 28 terabytes, which fits on 4 hard drives that you could buy at Best Buy and spend less than you spend on your rent each month. It's amazing. So we have this actual ability to do things very differently because the technology makes it so we can do things in a very distributed way and in a very centralized way. And it's how do you do this together? So we have a theory. So in this building libraries together, probably the most important thing out of that phrase, building libraries together, is the S on libraries. What we want at the end of the day is lots of libraries. Lots of libraries. Abby Smith-Rumsey speculates that at the end of the day there may only be 5 research libraries left. 5. That's it. There'll be 5. And there's reason to believe that that might be the case. I think this would be tragic. That we really want much more than that are full-fledged organizations. But how do you go and do that? So we have a theory. So it's broken up into 3 steps. One is coordinated collection development. Make it so that it's cost-effective to go and, say, digitize the analog into the digital, but don't duplicate effort. So if somebody else has done it, use it. Kind of like how our card catalogs went online. Why don't we do that with our books, music, video, so that it's a coordinated process, coordinated collection development. But then follow it up with distributed preservation. Have a big, solid download button. So the institutions get their own copies back from that process with no new restrictions. So there are the restrictions that have been put in place by some of these well-meaning, but I'd say misguided projects to go and digitize a lot of things like the Google project. They put new restrictions even on the public domain. I mean, the public domain is small enough as it is. The idea of going and kicking that puppy is really a bad idea. And much less the idea of making more restrictions on the in-copyright materials than the underlying copyright had. So distributed preservation. And then the third is both global and local access. So global access would be the Internet Archives of the world, or the Googles, or the Hathi Trusts, that are kind of good generic things that would be available to all. But then if UC Berkeley had some scientists that wanted to have access in some new and different way, they wouldn't have to ask permission. They would basically have the materials to be able to give it to that, or whoever it is, as long as they feel comfortable with it. So one of the tragedies for me is Aaron Schwartz. Aaron Schwartz, bright young man. He did data mining research. So he went and downloaded a lot of law materials and found correlations between people funding studies and law review outcomes, only because he could go and hoover up a lot of material. So he was doing something like that again, we think, on MIT's campus, downloading a lot of materials from JSTOR, a nonprofit library that serves other libraries. They went so ballistic on MIT that MIT called the cops. They came on campus, arrested him. And they basically badgered this guy and stripped him of a couple $1 million that he made from Reddit for legal fees, and he committed suicide just before his court date. They were threatening him with 35 years in jail for reading too fast in a library. This is dumb. These are the sorts of people that we at the Internet Archive give tools to do exactly what it is he was doing. But it shows a problem of having global access that's too constrained. I guarantee that if universities like MIT had copies of all of the JSTOR literature, and somebody like an Aaron Schwartz came to them and said, I want to do this non-consumptive use data mining on it, they would have said yes. But it went a different way. So, 3 steps towards building libraries together. Coordinated collection development, distributed preservation, global and local access. And then we have the efficiencies of working together, the efficiencies of cloud computing, but we have the flexibility and the Darwinian evolution of what are the services that our institutions can play. And this is just for books. And we're doing this sort of thing with web pages and working together with others in this same sort of triumvirate of ideas. But the idea is to let's build a library system at the end of the day, not a few big databases that we end up just subscribing to and having to live within those constrictions.
Thanks. Well, I think actually we're closer on this than I maybe thought we were at lunch when we talked about it. I'd like to follow up with you on some things, but I also want to give other people a chance. I have lots more things I would like to ask, but we are near enough the end of the time we should give other people a chance, so let's take questions from the audience. Yes?
I'd like to ask you about curating the Internet Archive. Once you've assembled all this information, and you're doing an incredible job, but you've got several types of works that I constantly encounter. You've got the lowest level, which is works reconstituted from very bad early primitive scans like microfilm, which is worse than powdered milk. Then you've got things from Project Gutenberg, which my heart sinks because they're usually OCR'd from said powdered milk. I recently looked up a W.H. Auden poem, and the first line, according to Project Gutenberg, was, "The thought of writing carne to me today." And I thought, oh, you mean the thought of writing came to me today? So if they're wrong like that, how can I trust anything that I find on that page, let alone cite it? The next thing is Google at some point went through and eliminated all the images from books, so that you've come to pages that are just blank, and this is the thing you were looking for, the map or the portrait or whatever, and it's not there. And then the fourth thing is, I was looking up a book on the Hattie Trust, I think through your page. It was a very rare 19th century conversational manual by Sadler, French-English conversational manual, and each page is an image, so I can't do a text search in there. But I'm going through, turning the pages, scanning like I would in a book, looking for the phrase that I'm looking for. And I come to a page, and it's a red rubber glove in a hand on the page. And then the next 4 pages are blurred, as if the shutter was going off as the pages were being turned. And I got to the end of the book and didn't find what I was looking for, and went back to the beginning and spent ages thinking, I should have gone to the library, I could have found this. So my question is, how satisfied are you with the quality of stuff on there, and is there any plan to curate it in a way that people will go and hit a button and say, you need to fix this, or even just little things that drive me nuts, like even numbered pages on the recto. I can't stand that. It's like, oh no! Somebody deleted the blank page 2, so page 3 got on the back of page 1, and then everything else is backwards. The gutters are on the outside. So as a reader, these things really bother me. So, how are you going to address this as you go on with your scanning?
Sorry about that. Well, a lot of people are doing what they can at the time. And there are certain constraints that are sometimes justified, sometimes not. And people are operating within actually an environment of fear in a lot of these projects. And we have to get over that. But as Bob Darnton from Harvard's librarian said, we might have to do this again. this may not be the last time we scan these books. And I think that's true. So the idea of doing destructive scanning, this strikes me as really wrong. I remember a librarian at MIT pulled me aside and said, Brewster, you know, thanks for this talk on universal access to all knowledge. The last time we kind of went over this was microfilm. And yeah, it's powdered milk, but it was a movement towards universal access. That we may have to do this again. That some of the scans that were done by Google were really based for indexing. And they learned a lot out of the texts, but it may not be the final copies that we have. And fortunately, it's getting cheap to go and take really high-res camera shots of these with the foldouts rather than ignoring the foldouts. You know, do the whole thing beautifully and well. It's about 10 cents a page or $30 a book. If you do it here, you can do it offshore, and it's about a third of the price. There's mechanisms to do this. So I think we have to push forward and say, let's get it to be good enough. Let's make it so that there aren't bizarre constraints that make it so people want to take out all the images out of the books, which is, you know, really ridiculous. But they thought that was needed for a copyright reason. So let's do our jobs, do them well, both institutionally, but individually, bringing ourselves forward. Curating is also collecting materials that aren't there yet and making sure that it's complete. And that's what we can do to make sure that the things that we value are in place for the next generation. I went and took the books that were published by my grandfather. They were self-help books from the 1950s. You know, who's it really going to be interesting to? My kids. And so I basically went and wrote a letter to the Wiley and said, I'm going to go and digitize these and put them up on the open internet. If you worry about this, let me know. They never wrote back. And so we digitized it and made it available. Make sure that what you care about moves forward. It's what we should do as parents, librarians, institutions. That's some of what we are for, is to make sure the next generation has what we think is important. So play a role. We that are doing the tools, we don't have an edit this button. There are reviews and people are complaining about some of the things that are going on. But I think we're going to have to take another run at it. And there's actually, I hear there's a new phase of the Northern Regional Library Facility, which is phase 4 that's going up, that's going to house another 5 million books. Why don't we go and digitize the things that are going in to that as it goes up? It doesn't cost that much. Let's just, once they're being taken off the shelves to go into those offsite repositories, that's a perfect time to go and find which aren't done really well and get them up and out. Yeah.
So I love the idea of the sort of distributed library future and having multiple institutions participating in building this. The problem is that the public funding for public goods seems to only go down, and these multiple libraries, multiple institutions are in pretty stiff competition with one another to be the best at something, or have, you know, prestige, get the money, and all that sort of thing. So how do you actually try to motivate that kind of coordination when everybody's actually needing to fight for little scraps of money that are still around?
Be super useful. I mean, the only way that you're going to get continuing funding is to be absolutely necessary. And so if you're working in the library system here or whatever, if you're not, the new data scientists aren't coming to you and pounding down the doors because they need you to be able to get some copyrighted whatever that they can't figure out how to get it for them, right? The libraries, almost all the books on these shelves are copyrighted, right? That's what we have. And we make that freely accessible to whoever walks in. Are we doing that digitally? No. So I think that the cure towards shrinking budgets is to be more useful. And that might take being a little more bold in terms of what it is, the services that we're producing for our users.
Yeah. Actually, Greg, your son, I think, wanted to have his hand up.
Why do people copyright books?
That's to you.
Actually, I want to turn it over to Pam, but
They have no choice. If you write it down, it's copyrighted. It's completely sick.
a short answer is that it's supposed to provide a living for people who create the books in the first place so that they can sell them and make a living on them. And if they couldn't copyright it, somebody else could take what they wrote and they could make it available without paying the person who wrote it in the first place. That was basically the idea back when copyright was invented. And you can yell at me later.
But there are a lot of people that actually don't want things restricted. And there's actually the Authors Alliance is founded here at Berkeley. Among, for instance, academic readers want their stuff maximally used. But they changed the law in such a way that these restrictions are automatic and almost impossible to get rid of. It's very weird. It used to be basically for a very small corner of the universe with things that were copyrighted. And then they changed it such that everything became copyrighted. Oh, and by the way, for almost forever. It's basically things have gone really wacko wrong in the copyright area. Fortunately, for those of us building digital libraries, lay people aren't expecting everything to be copyrighted forever. They're expecting, if somebody's making money off of it, let them continue to make money off of it. But if they're not making money off of it anymore, or ever did, that the idea of having institutional support for it is expected. So, in some sense, if you ask lawyers, the world looks very bleak. But if you ask the layperson, we have lots of room to go and grow.
Greg, you had a question?
Yeah, well, it's just so asymmetrical what we can get on our library right now. Like, I was looking up a book by Daniel Bornstein last night, and I saw like 10 reviews of Daniel Bornstein on my computer in a minute, right? It was great. The reviews were accessible, but the book itself was not. This is frustrating. And I need to figure out where we can put our energy and to get some leverage and change that. Because we're members of a community that wants to know these things. And we're not very good stewards of this knowledge if all we can get is the review of the original, but not the original thing itself.
Yeah, I guess one way to think about it is that 20 years ago, it was hard to get to the reviews as well. I mean, we had a lot more access to more information than we did. But yeah, it is very frustrating. I mean, especially, I find it extraordinarily frustrating. For a while I was sort of as a party trick during talks I was giving, saying, right here I've got 14 million books because I can connect to HathiTrust. And what I didn't point out when I was saying that was, but I'm not allowed to read them. I'm allowed to search them, so I can't actually read those 14 million books because of copyright restrictions. And yeah, it is terribly frustrating. And there are reasons and there are trade-offs and balances. But right now we've got certain types of information that we make very, very difficult for people to gain access to. Other types that are freely available. And that then biases what people rely on, of course, because they rely on the things that are more easily accessible to them and the things that may be of greater value are harder to get access to.
So can we crowdsource this? Can I just check out the book and scan it overnight and then bring it back and someone put it online somewhere?
That particular book, Daniel Bornstein, The Discoverers, is this great section called Expanding the Communities of Knowledge. It was required reading for everybody working on the Ways project. The title was interesting. Expanding the Communities of Knowledge. That knowledge has a community. And the community of knowledge lived in people's heads during the era before manuscripts. Then it moved to manuscript. Then it moved to printing. And this is the Librarian of Congress, I thought, giving a message to us that are working on the next generation of sort of what was it like to make these jumps. So if you want access to that, go to openlibrary.org and you can borrow that book for 2 weeks. If you borrow it, then nobody else can have access to it. Completely weird and clunky. When you finish that section, hit return, and then somebody else can check it out.
Okay, I'll go there.
Yeah?
So Brewster, thank you for mentioning Authors Alliance. One thing that you didn't mention, but I think is worth mentioning, is that if your book is not commercially active anymore, you can get your rights back. And Authors Alliance has published a rights reversion guide. It's a step-by-step. We're about to actually launch templates so that if you want to write a letter to your publisher to say, hey, the book isn't making that much money for you and it's not making that much money for me, so why don't you give me my rights back so that I can put it in the California Digital Library, HathiTrust, and Internet Archive. And every single one of the rights reversion requests that we've done so far has been granted. So people think, oh, you can't do it, you can. There's also, I think, efforts that we should be making to kind of spread knowledge about the ability to get rights back, especially for academic authors who want their works to be much more widely available. So.
And Michael, just raise your hand. Have any questions? Ask him. And so yes, let's go and show that people want to be read.
So that's a great note to end the official time on. We're at the end of our official time. I want to thank you, Brewster, for being here this week. It's been a great residency. A lot of people have gotten a lot out of this, and we really appreciate it. Thanks for this time. We've got a reception here and invite you all to stay and continue mingling and ask Brewster some more questions. But thank you so much.